My fellow Americans, I come before you today to tell you about a brilliant podcast. The best podcast, really. I am speaking, of course, about the Almost Academic podcast. Wow, what great guys these are. Funny, articulate, intelligent, drop-dead gorgeous. Man, I'd fuck them. Anyways, you need to subscribe to the Almost Academic podcast. You need to do it for the sake of freedom, for the sake of America. With that, my fellow Americans, I bid you farewell.
Donald, while we may not agree on much, we certainly agree on this point. The Almost Academic podcast is the pinnacle of podcast media, a bastion of virtue, humor, class, and style. When I said that I have a dream for America, I must admit, truly, that in my wildest dreams, I could not have imagined something so beautiful. This podcast is God's gift to the American people. My fellow Americans, subscribe today.
Thank you, Donald. Barack, as president of this beautiful country, I too must weigh in on this endorsement. There is no podcast, I repeat, no podcast better than the Almost Academic podcast right now. I must confess, sometimes during my morning briefings with the CIA and Mossad, we don't actually get any business done. I'm telling you, me and my handlers often spend the entire hour watching this podcast. It's that good, America. It's that good. Subscribe today, or you ain't black.
Okay, Joe, I have to stop you there in the interest of preserving the sanctity of the great office we have all held, but I too must give my shining endorsement to this podcast. America, there is perhaps no greater threat to terrorism around the globe than the Almost Academic podcast. I truly believe, and I say this with all sincerity, I truly believe that if these gentlemen had been producing this podcast on that fateful September morning, so many years ago, that the devastating attack on our nation would have been avoided. This podcast brings joy, it brings peace. And if Osama bin Laden had seen that our nation can produce such a masterwork of culture and grace, I'm confident that he would have left our nation alone. Subscribe today, America.
Gentlemen, I too must weigh in here. I will be the first to admit, and I admit this not without shame. I admit that I am a horny freak of a man. There is not much in this world that can stop this dog from getting his nut when he is on the prowl. I freely admit this, gentlemen. A man is but flesh and blood. I have one weakness, and it is women. That being said, America, I have finally found the antidote to my erotic Achilles heel, and it is nothing else except this podcast. The Almost Academic podcast saved my marriage. When I get that restless feeling in my bones, I turn this podcast on. And I find the contentment and spiritual peace I have been searching for in countless women's bosoms all my life. I find that peace from this podcast. Thank you, Almost Academic. Subscribe today.
Well, America, I will go ahead and finish this off here. I know that voice was you, Bill, but for some reason it didn't sound exactly right. Oh, well. Who knows? The horny freak part definitely checks out. Believe me, Bill, I would cheat too if I was married to Hillary. Anyways, if you haven't gotten the message yet, subscribe to the Almost Academic podcast. Do it now.